everyone, Elizabeth Copeland, Pro Trader here at Verified Investing. And today we're going to be going over some currencies, a big topic now that we're kind of in the midst of this conflict with Iran. And we've got a lot to go over, a lot of currencies, a lot of Forex. So let's dive right into it. And the first one we're going to look at today is the DXY, which since the start of the conflict, the war, whatever you want to name it, but since we've gone and been in this conflict, just over 2 weeks now. Look at the DXY, typically on an upstream where, we're going to find a little bit more of a safe haven, but look at it on a longer scale. We've actually got a big decline here and this small rally up. So, in the grand scheme of things, actually lower down on the charts. Just back in January of 2025, we were up at 110. And before that, right there, the upsloping trend line, October of 2022 at 114. So actually, if you look at the wide scope of things, which I typically find a little bit more difficult, I get stuck in this small little, trend of a week or two. But really, the grand scheme of things, you're seeing this nearly parallel channel being, hit quite a few times. So even on the weekly, let's even zoom out even more. I mean, holy cow, look at this small little chunk compared to where we were just back in 1985 at 163, right? But I mean, this downsloping trend line, you can see here, we've got, a breakout of that. It was retracing, push up even further. Now we're at 100 or so over the weekly chart. We can see there the SMA and the 50 and 200 kind of overlapping, kind of stuck under that SMA 50. And this is the weekly scale, remember. We're going back to the daily here, and we can delete this trend line. So in the scheme of things, yeah, we actually kind of hit this trend line and kind of consolidating around this lower edge. What we're going to be watching for is a typical breakdown scenario where you have this upsloping trend line. This price action comes down to that upsloping trend line. And since it's upsloping, typically would have a break to the downside if it continues to get hit over and over again, which has been hit quite a few times, especially nearly a breakdown in 2011, back in 2014, hit and then a nice rip up and then push down, nearly a pop up there right into the top there in 2022. But here we are, 2026. And this is what we're going to be watching is where it interacts with these SMAs. And if it can come back down to this upsloping trend line, breaking down, what would be a good level for those portfolios would see a retrace for more conservative level, conservative traders, a retrace and then push back down. So very interesting dynamic there with DXY. Another reminder that you definitely want to be zooming out in those charts, something I have a hard time doing, to see the overall price action, the overall scope of things, instead of focusing in on just 1 or 2 weeks. You really want to pull out and get the bigger picture. All right. So there's the DXY. We're just kind of watching it between these trend lines over the next several weeks and see what happens as it approaches this upsloping trend line, which could break down, and then a retrace would be a nice little entry level there for going short. Now, let's look at the euro and USD, which in the grand scheme of things, pull it out here, is higher on this chart where you see the lows were down to 1.0. But over here, we got this nice little rip up to the upside over just a couple of months there. So just a couple of months, we were up, let's see, in a year, just about 15% up to about 20% push. Right there from December 2024, all the way to February 2026. So just recently. So that's a nice little push up there, 18%. Again, pulling out because the grand scheme of things does matter. We actually, right off the bat here, let me delete these trend lines because right off the bat here, look at this. This is what catches my eye. This nice downsloping trend line, and boom, look at that. Fall from 2008, retraces. So acting as resistance here, right? Pops above, boom, retraced the scene of the crime right there in 2020, falls, acts as then support again, but breaks down. Look at that nice little head and shoulders pattern there, breaks down, a big flush out. Even after retracing there, you can see temporarily, and that was just about 15% move down. And then so this trend line is very powerful. It has acted as support and resistance, now recently as support back here in January of 2025. And now a nice push up. Again, this is the euro to the dollar. So a very interesting trend there. Now it's holding right around that SMA 50. So this is the weekly. So this is the 50 weekly simple moving average. And so actually looking like a little bit of a bear flag there. So that's going to be kind of an interesting setup over these next few weeks. Let's go to the daily and see what we can see here. Even on the daily, a nice kind of bear flag there. It's breaking down to the downside. Now on the short term, look what we have here. We have a little bit of a double bottom. So we could see a little breakdown of that. Here's again, that major trend line down here, but that would be a good, if we could break that, still be a good 14% to the downside. So very interesting there. Along the way, if we start breaking down, you could have support to these pivots, even some of these pivot highs here. So a lot of support in these areas before it even comes close to that trend line, but something interesting to watch will be this short-term bear flag, long-term even bear flag on the weekly, and those areas of support right where I said, actually kind of a nice little spot right in here as well, right in there. So right where all those lines are, nice little area of support before it could potentially come down and act as support on this trend line. All right, USD to the Canadian dollar. We're going to see a nice little rip up here over the last several days. This is the daily chart. Actually seeing a little bit, maybe even of a kind of a wonky head and shoulders pattern, or inverse head and shoulders, but it actually could be making one still, a shoulder, head, and let's see if it comes down and can break this this trend line here, the shoulder, for a nice move up. So it's actually looking a little bit more bullish. Not that I would go in right now on any kind of a potential bull flag. That would be pretty aggressive. But just something to watch over the next couple of days. And as we pull out here, I mean, all-time highs for, I'm not all-time highs, but since February 2025, we were up there at 1.4. Actually, a nice little, nearly triple top here, actually. So that does favor a move to the higher side if we could break that. But something interesting to watch there on the US Canadian dollar. We're going to see even this catching my eye right here as I'm kind of playing this out with you. Upsloping trend line, even a little head and shoulders pattern, a bigger scale one. So look, there's patterns all in this. So micro scale, a typical little inverse head and shoulder here, but on a macro scale, you can see a inverse head and shoulders pattern there. Actually, this is the neckline right here. It did actually, kind of interesting. Look at that. So if we kind of delete all of these, this is pretty interesting here as I'm going through it with you. Head and shoulders kind of breaks down, retraces a few times, kind of fakes out, and then pushes above. Typically, you would see this measured move play out, but that didn't happen. And it just pushed, and then finally broke back through. And the upside there, target could be as high as this, what would be triple top. But we could see some upside from that even as we go forward. So something interesting to watch there on the USD and Canadian dollar. Now let's go to the yen and USD. This is going to be really interesting because this is the weekly chart, so a little bit more wider scale, kind of a longer term chart here. But what's interesting is that we actually have kind of a double top here, recently high of July 2024. So this might be a nice pivot high to see a reversal. That reversal happens. What's going to be holding it next is this upsloping trend line. Again, a breakdown of that and retrace to the faller side, the lower side. Could be something very interesting to watch there. So if we get a rejection at this double top, we could see it push down to this upsloping trend line. It's been hit once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, nearly 5. So that would favor a move to the downside, a nice little entry level as it retraces and potential falling down even more. Remember, 162 is going to be that key level. Even further out, we've actually see this nice wedge pattern here play out again. Right there, boom, retrace and moved up. So that retrace works as resistance at first, now support, and it could act as support again if this continued breakdown happens. So very interesting stuff there on the USD and yen. Thanks so much for watching. We've got a lot to play out over the next couple of weeks, a lot of it playing out on what happens in Iran, and we're going to be watching that very closely for you. Thanks for joining me today. Have a great day.